hear all of it. But what I'd like also, I'd be happy, I don't know how you feel, but I'd be happy to have people interrupt as we go. So, because I don't have such a beautiful presentation as Andreas did. So it's not as well worked out. So I'm happy to take questions. So if you want to, someone can I won't see people with their hands raised, but if someone can interrupt me or just sort of break in, I guess maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I can let you know if somebody has any question. They can send a message on the text or the chat, and I will see it. Yeah.
Great.
I'll let you know.
Great. Okay. Let's see. That's a good way to. Okay. Okay. Goodbye, Supervenience. Here we go. Okay, so everyone, I guess, by everyone, I mean every analytic philosopher, something like that, can define physicalism. It's the theory that everything is physical. Of course, each of those terms and phrases is open to further explanation, but let's just say that for now. And at least maybe before Andreas's talk, everyone could also say, well, I don't know, maybe if he'd still, I guess composition might, well, it would create a nomological type of supervenience. But most everyone in the literature, huge swaths of people would state that a significant necessary condition for the truth of the physicalism is some type of supervenience thesis that carries usually logical, but sometimes nomological, sometimes metaphysical force, either some type of modal force. Chalmers, Jackson, think of it as logical, and Jonathan Schaffer, and I think, well, probably others, though maybe not explicitly so, would think of it as just a metaphysical force. Okay, so it's really common ground in a lot of arguments. And the the concept of supervenience that's usually thought of as being the necessary condition is something like, there's a number of sort of somewhat equivalent versions of this, is Jackson's, I'll just call it S, supervenience thesis. So any world that's a minimal physical duplicate of our world is a duplicate simpliciter. Okay, so what does he mean? A minimal physical duplicate is a duplicate of our world that copies all of the fundamental physical, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what that might be. The fundamental physical, we can think of it as the fundamental particles, the matter particles, the exchange particles. You can just think of all of that. And it doesn't duplicate anything that our world doesn't have. So that's the minimal physical duplicate. And then it's a duplicate without qualifications. It's a complete duplicate of our world. Okay, so it's commonly thought that physicalism entails S, and I'm going to argue that it doesn't. I have to get a drink of water. I'll just be back in 1 second. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Okay, so here just are a number of people who we can call the idea that physicalism entails some type of supervenience, like the one you've just been looking at on the screen while I was getting water, the entailment thesis. Okay, and these are just a number of quotes from people who say that it does. And you can really find many more. I just give a smattering. Here, just to give Barry Lower's, I'll just read Barry Lower's. A necessary condition for physicalism is that mental properties, events, and laws supervene on physical ones. Okay. It's thought to be something that no matter how different physicalist views, how physicalist views differ, they need to share at least this. Okay. Okay, why is it significant though? I mean, of course, if physicalism is true, many other things follow from it. It's also another necessary condition for its truth is that 2 + 2 has to equal 4. This is a significant condition because it's at the basis of it's what most arguments against physicalism try to refute. Okay, so Jackson says that, well, okay, the thesis that the truth of supervenience is necessary for the truth of physicalism typically does much of the heavy lifting in various anti-physicalist arguments in the philosophy of mind. Okay, so, and some of this I think came up in Andreas's talk. So the conceivability of zombies, it is thought refutes physicalism by showing that supervenience doesn't hold. And for those who think that the Mary argument is successful, it's thought that Mary's ignorance about color refutes physicalism, given that it implies that S fails. Okay. So if physicalism doesn't entail S, then these arguments lose their punch. Okay, I'm going to argue that, well, physicalism doesn't entail it. Okay, so it's sort of a, how do you argue for this view? Because isn't it just definition? So I have a methods section. I was thinking, okay, so I think my compared to what we just heard, Andreas, I think what I'm going to do is even argue for a position that's even more metaphysics light than Andreas's, possibly. Well, I don't know. No, I don't know about that, but it is maybe going to be a little bit more conceptual analysis heavy, which some might see as just as bad or worse. But how do you sort of argue for this view, because it's just presented as definition? Well, one thing, and I'm not, because there was no time on the plane to really organize this as well as I should. I'm not really going to get to all of these or necessarily in order either, but one thing you can do, and then also thinking I was going to start much later, but one thing I'm going to do is just ask the question why sometimes, like the 2-year-old and children are supposed to be often thought of as good philosophers, actually. But ask the question why. Some claims that we hear frequently again and again and again that we're told, that we grow up with, that we're indoctrinated with, dare I say, ask why should we think. Okay, that's like that's a step to make us question something. Question why we're holding a certain commitment. There's sort of a psychoanalytic sort of aspect to this work, which is, well, sort of illustrate to philosophers who have defined physicalism. Of course, you can, this is what you want, fine, you just do that, and that's your research project. Like Andreas specifies a research project, it's very clear, and we know what he's doing, and okay, so you can always do that. But what I think that I feel, although it hasn't happened since I wrote, I think, first paper on this maybe 2012 hasn't happened too much, but I have noticed some, some people have sort of taken it on. But say, well, do you really, look at what your position entails, actually, your commitment to some type of modal supervenience entails. Do you really accept that? And I think that when some people see what some of the implications, that they might change their minds, actually. So, and to do that, although I'm not going to really do that in this talk, but you can sort of present scenarios that seem that I think most people who call themselves physicalists would accept, but I mean, I'll try to do it in passing, but it contradicts supervenience. I mean, well, I'll just to do it like quickly, just a sort of more of a Nancy Cartwright type of view. Well, that goes even further. Okay, I can't go into it so quickly, but we'll see. Okay, so there's a couple arguments, one sort of central one for the entailment from physicalism to supervenience. I can criticize it. I think it is flawed. It's Jackson's argument, and I think he's admitted that he has actually in print admitted that it's flawed, based on my criticism. And then by offering an alternative significant necessary condition that's sort of supposed to illustrate what physicalists really are. They're sort of the spirit, as David Chalmers talks about, the spirit of physicalism. Whether we want to call this physicalism, like maybe, and I'll hear from Jessica, maybe she'd want to call it emergentism. I don't really care so much. I think that what you could see, I just want to say it's people would say, who call themselves physicalists, would probably, I think, say it's not really a big deal if the modal supervenous claims fail in this way. Okay, that's a lot of like meta talk about what I'm gonna do, and I haven't done anything yet. But here, let's go on. Okay, here, I'm gonna start with some why questions. Why? Okay, so just here, Chalmers writes, it may be naturally impossible. Consciousness may in fact arise from that functional organization in the brain correlated with consciousness in the actual world. But the important thing is that the notion of zombies is logically coherent. Okay, I think maybe Andreas got a sort of question about this. Well, I mean, what's important though is that there's this, that the physicalist has this commitment to the idea that in any logically possible world that duplicates our fundamental physical properties, you're going to get consciousness. And zombies shows that this isn't true. So he thinks that this is what's important in the debate. Okay, but why is that important? Why is that important? You know, when someone says something is important, probably it's because you have to say that it is, because it might not be actually. Okay, well, I mean, for it, it's important. It contradicts the entailment thesis, but why should physicalists be committed to a type of modal supervenience? Okay, well, so I'm going to just look at a few reasons why you might think. It captures this all God had to do idea. So isn't physicalism the idea that God created the fundamental physical particles and forces, and then everything else came for free? If we have a failure of S, there's more work to be done. God had to do more work. Okay. Okay, so there's two questions to ask. Well, okay, and this first one, okay, thank Jessica, I'm just really late last night. I was sort of thinking about this first one, and probably Jessica, you can help me with this. It's not probably so clear. Why should the rejection of S imply that God has more work to do, actually? And, okay, and maybe if it does, what's wrong with a little extra work anyway? What's wrong with it? What's the big deal? Okay, so the first one, this one is just something I really did late last night, so I'm not sure, but let me give it a try. Why should the rejection of S imply that God has more work to do beyond putting in place all the stuff, all the fun, the quarks, leptons, exchange particles? Okay, why does it imply that? Okay. Doesn't the fundamental stuff in our world give us the rest of the world? Why is any more work? Why does God need to do more work to get the rest of the world? Okay, well, perhaps one needs to add the laws of our world. And this, I guess, depends on whether you're a human supervenient person, whether you accept human supervenience about, whether you're a human about laws, whether they just come from more basic things. But, and if you need to, okay, and if you're not, well, unless you're a human, unless you think it comes for free, God would need to do that anyway. God needs to add those laws anyway. So we have to add those laws anyway. Okay, but okay, and thinking about this, once you add those laws, don't we get a type of supervenient? Isn't any world that's going to duplicate the fundamental forces and particles and laws? It's in any logically possible world, then also we're going to get everything else if the laws give it in our world. Well, is that true? Okay, so not if the laws are chancy or something. Maybe you wouldn't get it. So, so I guess, so my idea here is, what is my idea? My idea is that I'm not sure that there is any more work that God needs to do beyond, even if it's logically possible that the fundamental physical aspects of the world do not give rise to anything else, even if it's normal, even if it's metaphysically possible that they don't. If they give rise to everything else in our world, well, then hasn't God done enough? I mean, so, so what I'm saying here is, in a way, like maybe God is neither a mathematician nor a metaphysician. God didn't care about like making certain that any logically possible world would end up, that has brains, would also have, like ours, would also have consciousness like ours. Maybe God didn't care about that. Maybe God just cares about our world, you know, and just was a gambler about the other ones, didn't care. So I'm not even sure. So this, I'm not quite sure about this, but I don't know if it means that God has any work to do. But let's just say, if God does have some more work to do, to somehow, God wants to get the rest of the world sewn together with certain logical, by logical strings. Okay, so what? Like, what if there's extra work to do? What if there's extra work to do even in our own world, let's say? So even as a matter of physical necessity, there's the Big Bang. That was a lot of work, okay, definitely. And then maybe there's work later on, like to get the chemical bonding. That somehow needed to come later on. We're not going to get this type of constitution explanation for chemical bonding then. No. Oh well, if God doesn't actually enter the picture, as physicalists who accept this all God has to do metaphor, then, and if we could get nature to do the Big Bang, maybe nature did a few other things along the way too. We don't really believe that, right? But if that were the case, like, oh, is this a disaster for physicalism? Is this a disaster for those who have some type of physicalist sentiment? Would their worldview collapse? Yeah, I mean, I think certain research programs, yes, would, like the one maybe Andreas is, presenting, but would something about what one's commitment to how they think the world is, like, well, okay, so there were a few times during the course of the evolution of the universe that certain things, maybe we would say, Jessica would say, emerged or something. So, and we don't have explanations for them, but that's just how the world works. Yeah, okay, so that's what I think I just said, right? What's wrong with God needing to do if God doesn't exist? I think the metaphor works because we sort of imagine, in thinking about it, we imagine God existing, but if God doesn't exist, I don't know if there's a big problem with doing extra work. It's supposed to involve further creation beyond the Big Bang. Okay, as I just talked about, but if one doesn't object to the opening Big Bang, why object to some smaller bangs during later acts? Why object to that? Maybe it's not true that it happened, but why should, if we lived in a world in which that did happen, so what? Do we really care that much about that? Yes, interesting physics-wise, interesting about scientifically, it's very interesting. But somehow as a worldview, does it really sort of crush the spirit of physicalism? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Okay, if supervenience fails, here's another reason why modality is thought to be important in this debate. And this I think came up, although I was sort of getting ready furiously listening to the question and answers, but I think this question also came up for Andreas. If S fails, then the connection between mind and brain is merely nomological. So it's just a matter of natural law. We're just connected. And, but that's exactly the type of law that would hold between the neural and the mental if dualism were true. Okay, so we can't have it that way. But no, so what? There's a lot of laws that would hold if dualism were true. The law of gravity would presumably hold if dualism were true, yet the law of gravity does not pose a problem for physicalism. So just this mere fact that this is the type of law that would hold if dualism were true doesn't imply that this is a dualistic position. We need something else to show that. Just the mere fact that this is the type of law that would hold. I'm just repeating myself, I guess, if dualism were true. But pedagogically, I think that's supposed to be good. Repeat yourself. Okay, it doesn't show that. That's not enough. Okay, so are there any questions, anything? I can't see, I only see a couple, 2 people, I don't know. And they look, is everyone okay so far? Yeah, okay, yes, okay. Oh no, oh dear, oh, this is bad. We get over and aboveness. We get the mind is over and above the brain. And this is really bad, right? Well, you know, what is this over and aboveness? What is, and even that phrase, over and above, it's sort of weird, right? I mean, it's over and above. I mean, are those supposed to be 2 different things or what? I don't know. Well, okay, it seems like somehow, especially if you think of a halo or something, the immortal soul, is that like, oh, that might be over and above you somehow. Heaven is over and it's up there. I don't, but even dualism doesn't imply that our souls are immortal, right? You know, Descartes originally, you know, subtitled the meditations in which it's proved that the soul is mortal. But then when someone pointed out that he doesn't prove that, he had to change it, right? Dualism doesn't even imply that. So what is this over and above? I mean, well, okay, I should have gone back. I guess it implies, I don't know how to go back. I don't see my arrow for some reason, but okay. You know, it implies the rejection of supervenience. And that's what I'm questioning. That's all I'm questioning. Okay, so let me, this is like a really long paragraph. And I don't want to read it because I don't even know how much time I have left. So I'm going to, because I have somehow the clock covered up. You're going to trust me, and I'm going to just go to the next slide in which I break it up into like premises. And I've just really just, for one, Jackson himself has seen it and has agreed with this. So you can trust me here that I'm doing it correctly. Okay, so Jackson has an argument that physicalism entails the type of modal supervenience thesis that he holds, or that he's presented as being as physicalism entailing, and that he does now hold to. Okay, and his argument goes like this. Okay, so suppose that this minimal physical duplicate of our world is not a complete duplicate of our world. Suppose that. Suppose we duplicate our world, the quarks, the leptons, the exchange particles, and so forth, and we don't get a complete duplicate. Okay. Well, if that's true, then what's true is the 2 worlds are going to differ. Dun, dun, dun. And then it means at least one is going to contain something the other does not. Okay, but by definition, the duplicate world doesn't contain anything. That's why it's a minimal duplicate. It doesn't contain anything that isn't in our world. Okay, so this is fine. I think that's fine up until there. Now here's the problem, number 4. Okay, but what about the other direction? Could our world contain something that the minimal physical duplicate does not? Okay, so he says that if our world were to contain something that the minimal physical duplicate does not, then whatever is in this world wouldn't be physical. And thus physicalism is false, thus physicalism implies S. Okay, so 4. Why is 4 problematic? Okay, let's go. Let's see what I have on this. Oh, it's small, isn't it? The font. Okay. Okay, why is it that if our world were to contain anything that the physical, anything that the minimal physical duplicate would not, then whatever it is would not be physical, and thus physicalism would be false? That's the whole thing that I'm questioning. Why does our, okay, and that's what he thinks. He thinks that our world containing something non-physical would show that physicalism is false. Okay, the problem is he's using physical in 2 different ways. Okay, so there's a narrow, what I usually call like a narrow sense and a broad sense, I think I said. A narrow sense, which means just the fundamental physical properties of physics, the quarks and leptons. And then and people use these, and it's sometimes clear in context, but here they've gotten mixed up. And then there's the broad sense in which, like when we say physicalism is the view that everything is physical, then that means tables are physical and chairs are physical and so forth. That's also, so that's the broad sense in which it means the fundamental stuff and the less fundamental stuff. Okay, so, and he's moving from one idea to another. Okay, so our world and the duplicate are stipulated as physically identical, but they're only stipulated as physically identical in the narrow sense of physical, not in the broad sense, as containing nothing inconsistent with physicalism. Okay, and it's the broad sense in which if S fails, that our world would contain something not physical. So if supervenience failed because, so for example, in this sense, supervenience could fail because our world contains a blade of grass that is absent in the duplicate world. Okay, it contains something then that isn't, it contains, this wouldn't contradict physicalism because it contains something that is still broadly physical, but it's not narrowly physical. Okay, so he doesn't have an argument. Basically, it's like all that. It's just to say there's no argument for the view that physicalism entails. And I think, yeah, Andreas, just sort of like solved through all that sort of nonsense, I guess, that argument. Like there just is no argument for the view that physicalism entails a supervenience thesis. It's something many people have held, but it's not, I don't see, okay, so, but it's not, we're gonna wrap up soon, but it's not, because I need to give you some time to sing at the end, okay? But it's not, there's not an argument for it. Okay, now here's, okay, one of the last things of the project to do is to present what I think of as a better necessary condition. And in a sense, it claims less than what, not in a sense, it claims less than what Andreas' view claims, I think. I haven't thought about this clearly yet, I guess, but okay. So possibly here, the relevant physicalist commitment is to the idea that mentality and other features of the world fit in more or less the way such things as chemical bonding, photosynthesis, biological fitness, and so forth fit into the world. Okay, however that is. whether it's constitution, whether we live in a radically dappled world like Nancy Cartwright, where we don't get even nomological supervenience. As long as the mind isn't the exception to the way the rest of the world is sewn together, generally speaking, if the mind doesn't stand out, then we're fine. And I think that this is what David Chalmers actually thinks that physicalists are committed to, because he always adds, when he argues against supervenience, he always adds, and as a matter of fact, look, everything else does supervene on the fundamental physical. The Mary, everything else she is supposed to be able to know. And I think what's important is this everything else. It's not just the supervenience itself. And whether everything else does, it's, I think, an open question. I think it depends on really, it depends on the world and the science. And I'm not so, not convinced that more of a Nancy Cartwright view isn't correct, or that we don't get, that more doesn't give you something different. And so, but I think that, so whether one wants to call that emergence or not, but I think most physicalists are actually committed to this, that the mental isn't something special, unusual in the world. Okay, one way to satisfy this commitment they have is to sew all levels of organization together with either metaphysical or logical supervenient threads. But another way is to just remove all the stitching, to see each level of organization, which these are roughly sort of defined. I mean, I guess in terms of composition, I don't see this, I think it's depends on context, on what you're interested in, is whether something else constitutes something. I mean, you sometimes, just recently I was reading rereading Lives of the Cell, just such a lovely book, but right, how he talks about, well, our mitochondria, since they have their own DNA, they shouldn't really count as part of us. So it depends, I think it's context relevant, what constitution counts. So I think, but as long as we sort of see the world in some way, the mind is not something special, not something, I think that's the dualist's main commitment. Our minds are something really special in the world. They came about, maybe, because some dualists think because we were created in the image of God. And this is a special idea for the mind. And I think it's some sort of rejection, and the spirit of physicalism is to reject that special, unique non-supervenience of the mind. Okay, so here you go for your new song, which I can just let you sing on your own to the tune of Ruby Tuesday. Thanks.